I started getting fat when I was 12.
I was always thin.
By the time I was 15, I was a size 20.
Not just thin, skinny, which wouldn't have mattered if I had breasts, but I didn't.
If I ate a carrot, I gained 3 pounds.
Mary, is that you in the refrigerator?
It was. My mother was always saying,
You have such a pretty face. You could be so attractive if you would just lose a little weight.
my mother was the most competent human being alive, but she'd given up on me clothes-wise. She'd send me off to a store called Jane Engel, and they'd bring out clothes for me to try on. There was a dressing room with 3 mirrors, but no matter which way I looked, there I was, big as a house. There's never really been a good time to be fat, but this was particularly difficult because of Audrey Hepburn.
My shrink said.
If you ever got happy, you would gain weight.
And she also said.
This is all because of your mother.
My mother? I'm thin because of my mother?
Yes.
Couldn't it just be my wonderful metabolism?
No.
By the time I married Kenny, I had managed to diet down to 152 pounds, which was real thin for me, but Kenny didn't care what I weighed because he was gay and would have married me if I had 2 heads.
I have a picture of me and my first husband sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park. I look really happy, but I was never happy with David. When I see that picture, I'm reminded that photos, they lie. And so many marriages are just performances.
When I married Kenny, I wore my mother's wedding dress. It fit with some adjustments. It was an absolutely beautiful dress. She got it at Bergdorf's. And just as I was getting dressed before the wedding, the dressmaker pricked her finger on a needle and got blood on the dress, just like in Sleeping Beauty. My mother said,
I can fix that.
and she could. After all, she was the most competent human being alive. So I wore the dress for my wedding. My sister wore it for hers. My older daughter wore it for hers until finally it got down to my younger daughter, Jenny, who said, no way in hell am I getting into that bad luck dress. So we had a wedding dress designed for her by Vera Wang. And Jenny got divorced too. We all got divorced, my whole family. Everybody except for my mother, who stayed married to my father for 56 miserable years.
After being married to David for 3 years, I would endlessly fantasize about tragically and miraculously losing him. Every time he coughed, TB. Every time he was 5 minutes late, automobile accident. Every time we would go to a party, I hoped he would go into the back and make out with one of my friends. But none of them liked him either.
You are ambivalent.
Ambivalent. I was not remotely ambivalent.
You are ambivalent. You really love him. You are just too neurotic to realize it.
Okay, I was neurotic, but not because I didn't love my husband, but because I was pretending to love my husband when I didn't. So after 6 years, Dave and I got divorced, but not before spending an entire week talking nonstop. We even ended up talking naked, which you might think meant we finally spoke the truth, but we didn't.
Why were you naked?
Because we just had sex. My husband and I were lying there, and he was telling me that he wanted me to stop writing. I'd only written 1 book at that point. I remember while he was talking to me, reciting the entire beginning to myself, but just so I wouldn't listen to anything else he was saying. So David and I got divorced, and I left my shrink.
When I married Henry, I wore my mother's navy blue suit. I looked like a 110-year-old Italian war widow. But I lived happily ever after.
When I married Jerry, I wore a shocking pink Mexican cotton skirt and a white Mexican blouse off the shoulder. It's not something that would normally look good on a skinny person, but hey, I gained 5 pounds. And we all know what a big deal 5 pounds is.